My words, they're from Mohammad Sadir, Iran's top foreign policy advisor, who just unleashed a blistering attack on Moscow in a recent interview. Watch this.
Under no circumstances should we trust them. In the recent war and the previous one, when Israel hit all our air defense centers, questions were raised. How Israel knew about them with such precision. My analysis is that the Russians passed this information to the Israelis.
Sadir didn't hold back. He torched the Iran-Russia alliance, calling it a scam, a betrayal, and accusing Putin of stabbing Iran in the back. What's shocking is that this comes just months after Tehran signed a 20-year strategic pact with Moscow. But since then, Iran's been hit, isolated, and ignored. And Russia? They're nowhere to be found. According to Sadir, Iran may have made a deal with the devil, and a useless one at that. Iran now sees Moscow as a treacherous opportunist. Let's unpack how a 20-year pact turned into a diplomatic disaster, and how its collapse is reshaping alliances across the region. To understand why these words came from such a passionate place, we need to establish the events that led up to this. Back in January, Iran and Russia signed a big deal in Moscow. It was a 20-year agreement meant to tie them together on everything from trade to energy to military cooperation. Both countries were under heavy pressure from sanctions, with the United States and Europe squeezing their economies hard. The deal looked like a lifeline for two countries pushed to the sidelines, a way to stand strong together. Leaders shook hands, made speeches about unity, and sold it as a bold move to outsmart their enemies. For a moment, it seemed like they had a very real shot at making things work. Iran went into this with big expectations. They wanted advanced weapons to protect themselves, especially from Israel, which has always been a major concern. They had their eyes on Russian fighter jets that could compete in the skies, and defense systems that could shoot down enemy threats from far away. Iran also hoped Russia would have their back if things got heated. Maybe not fighting directly, but at least offering some kind of support. The deal came from years of smaller agreements, with Russia selling Iran older systems in the past. But as the months passed, those hopes started to fade. Russia kept delaying the delivery of equipment, blaming things like factory issues or worries about upsetting other countries. Iran waited, thinking patience might pay off, but the gap between what they wanted and what they got kept growing. Then came June, when everything fell apart.
We're getting word that Israel's launching preemptive airstrikes against Iran. Explosions were reported in Tehran, the capital.
Israel carried out a surprise attack on Tehran, one of which hit a state-run TV station.
You can see the devastating impact of this Iranian ballistic missile strike. This was a residential apartment block, not a military target, and it's been totally devastated.
On the morning of the 13th, Israel launched a wave of coordinated airstrikes that would shake Iran's military to its core. They called it Operation Rising Lion. And it wasn't just fast, it was surgical. Over the next 12 days, Israeli jets, drones, and covert assets tore through Iran's defenses with brutal efficiency. The targets weren't random. They were the backbone of Iran's military posture. Nuclear enrichment sites, missile silos, radar stations, IRGC command centers, and air defense batteries. By the end of it, more than 900 locations were hit. Hundreds of missile launchers were wiped out, slashing Iran's retaliatory capacity by nearly half. And just like that, the illusion of readiness collapsed. Inside Tehran, the leadership was scrambling. Communications were disrupted, command chains fractured. The air defense grid, once touted as layered and impenetrable, was exposed as brittle. This was supposed to be Iran's moment to show strength. Instead, it became a showcase of vulnerability. The strikes weren't just powerful, they were precise. Too precise. It felt like Israel had a map of Iran's entire defense layout, down to the last radar dish. And to make matters worse for Iran, Israel wasn't alone. Within hours of the first strike, the United States issued a statement of full support, calling the operation a necessary act of self-defense. American satellites, intelligence assets, and refueling aircraft quietly backed the campaign from the sidelines. Britain, France, and Germany followed suit, voicing solidarity and offering logistical support. The West closed ranks around Israel, reinforcing its position and sending a clear message. This wasn't just Israel's fight, it was a coalition-backed show of force. Meanwhile, Russia, the nation that was supposed to be Iran's strategic partner, was silent. No condemnation, no support, no mobilization. Moscow's media outlets downplayed the strikes, and Kremlin officials dodged questions. For Tehran, the silence was deafening, and thus began the problems. To understand why this hit so hard for Iran, you have to look at what Iran actually put on the table. This wasn't just a handshake and a few polite agreements, it was a serious investment. Iran had been sending thousands of drones to Russia, including the Shahed 136 and other variants, fueling Moscow's war machine in Ukraine. These drones weren't symbolic. They were central to Russia's battlefield strategy, used to strike Ukrainian infrastructure, cities, and supply lines. Iran didn't just offer support, it gave Russia a tactical edge. And it wasn't a one-way street. Tehran expected something in return, not just vague promises or diplomatic nods, but real tangible support. Advanced fighter jets to replace its aging fleet, modern air defense systems to shield its skies from hostile strikes, technology transfers, training, a strategic buffer against Israel and the West. The 20-year agreement signed in January wasn't just about trade, it was about survival. It talked about cooperation in defense, joint development, and strategic alignment. It didn't explicitly say Russia would fight Iran's wars, but the tone suggested loyalty. Tehran read it as a signal. When things got tough, Moscow would stand by them. So when Israel launched Operation Rising Lion and began hammering Iran's military infrastructure, Iran waited. They expected Russia to speak up, to condemn the strikes, to offer intelligence, or at least signal solidarity. But Moscow said nothing. No jets arrived. No S-400s were deployed. No satellite data was shared. Just silence, and more excuses. Logistics, timing, bureaucracy, everything but action. For Iran, that silence felt like betrayal. They had backed Russia when few others would. They had risked sanctions, isolation, and diplomatic backlash to support Moscow's war in Ukraine. And when their own cities were burning, Russia didn't even offer strong words. No emergency shipments, no visible support, just delays in diplomatic fog. It wasn't just about weapons, it was about trust. Iran saw Russia as a strategic partner, maybe even as a friend, someone who would show up when it mattered. But when the missiles came, that friendship vanished. And what was left was a bitter realization. Iran had given much and gotten almost nothing in return. With no choice left and no Russian help, Iran tried to respond. Missiles and drones were launched towards Israeli cities. A few made it through, damaging buildings and injuring civilians, but the impact was limited. Iran's Iron Dome and David Sling systems intercepted most of the incoming fire. And while Iranian state media pushed footage of successful hits, the reality on the ground told a different story. Back home, the Iranian government went into damage control mode. They flooded the airwaves with images of missile launches, drone footage, and patriotic rallies. Officials praised the resistance and vowed revenge. But behind the scenes, the mood was pretty grim. The question started spreading. How did Israel know exactly where to strike? How did they bypass systems that were supposed to be state-of-the-art? And why did Russia stay silent? The war didn't last long, but its impact did. It was a wake-up call, not just for Iran's military planners, but for foreign policy architects. The alliance with Russia was supposed to bring protection, deterrence, and advanced weapons. Instead, Iran stood exposed, isolated, and asking hard questions. Operation Rising Lion wasn't just a military campaign, it was a mirror. And what Iran saw in that mirror was a defense strategy built on shaky ground, a partnership that didn't hold, and a vulnerability that could no longer be denied. In the pursuit of answers, Iran began to suspect that it was surrounded by traitors. Azerbaijan quickly emerged as a prime suspect. The logic was hard to ignore. It shares a long border with Iran, maintains deep military ties with Israel, and has previously been accused of allowing Israeli operatives to stage surveillance missions from its territory. Iranian hardliners and IRGC-linked media amplified the story, suggesting that Baku had betrayed Tehran by offering up its soil or its silence to Israeli intelligence. But amid the rising speculation, Iran's Supreme National Security Council stepped in to cool the flames. Ali Larijani, the council's top official, publicly dismissed the rumors, stating that no evidence at all pointed to Azerbaijan involvement. He emphasized that Baku's own statement showed no hostility towards Iran and that diplomatic channels remained intact. This wasn't just a denial, it was a strategic recalibration. By clearing Azerbaijan, Tehran signaled it was done chasing shadows and ready to focus on more credible threats. The denial mattered. It preserved regional stability at a time when Iran and Azerbaijan had just signed over 50 cooperation agreements. Other theories lingered in the background. Some pointed to Kurdish networks, especially after mass arrests in western provinces. Others hinted at Western intelligence coordination, though no official accusations were made. But with Azerbaijan off the table, the narrative shifted. This wasn't about neighbors. It was about bigger players, deeper breaches, and a war that was being fought in silence long before the missiles ever flew. Following this, Mohammad Sadir stepped in and dropped the kind of accusation that doesn't just stir headlines, but shakes alliances. He claimed Russia had handed Israel the coordinates of Iran's air defense sites, giving them the exact blueprint they needed to cripple Iran's response. It wasn't vague, it wasn't speculative. Sadir said it plainly. Russia betrayed Iran. And this wasn't coming from some fringe commenter or anonymous source. Sadir is a senior member of Iran's Expediency Discernment Council, a veteran diplomat with deep ties to the supreme leader's inner circle. His words carry weight, his access is real, and his timing was explosive. Sadir went even further in that same interview, pointing fingers at Israel for what he sees as the assassination of Iran's former president, Ibrahim Raisi, back in that helicopter crash last May. He laid it out as a part of a bigger pattern, where Israel had been working behind the scenes to weaken Iran at every turn, from targeting leaders to hitting military sites. This wasn't just some offhand remark. It tied into his frustration over how exposed Iran has been left, with enemies striking at the heart of its leadership and no real allies stepping up to prevent it. It painted a picture of Israel as this relentless force that's been chipping away at Iran's stability for years, making the recent war feel like the culmination of a long campaign rather than just a standalone event. The timing couldn't have been more volatile. Iran was already reeling from the war's cost. Years of military investment reduced to rubble, strategic assets crippled, and a sense of vulnerability that cuts deeper than any missile ever could. Sadir's claim tapped into something older, a long-standing unease about Russia's reliability. For years, Israel had struck Iranian targets in Syria with impunity, often within range of Russian radars and air defenses. Moscow never intervened. Hundreds of attacks. And not once did Russia step in. Iranian commanders had noticed, strategists had whispered, but now with Israel striking inside of Iran itself, the whispers turned into accusations. Was Russia ever truly an ally, or just a convenient partner when it suited their interests? Now, as you might imagine, the accusation landed like a missile inside of Iran's political establishment. It put immediate pressure on the factions that had championed the Russia alliance, those who had pushed for deeper military cooperation, joint defense deals, and long-term strategic planning with Moscow. Suddenly, their credibility was on the line. The 20-year pact that they had celebrated now looked like a miscalculation, and the silence from Russia during the June war wasn't just frustrating, it was suspicious. And as you can imagine, even without hard proof, the speculations began. Iranian media picked up the story fast. Social platforms lit up. Analysts, former generals, and even clerics began weighing in. Was Russia ever truly on Iran's side? Had Tehran been played? The public, already rattled by the precision of Israel's strikes, now had a new question. Did Russia help make it happen? The anger spread quickly. People weren't just upset about the damage, they felt betrayed. The alliance with Russia had been sold as a shield, a strategic partnership that would elevate Iran's position and protect it from hostile powers. And now, one of Iran's most trusted voices was saying the shield had been sabotaged from the inside. That question didn't just linger, it triggered a quiet but urgent investigation. In the aftermath of the June 2025 Iran-Israel conflict, Iranian intelligence officials began a deep review of their cyber infrastructure, focusing especially on systems tied to military command centers and air defense coordination. What they found was deeply unsettling. Several networks that were supposed to be isolated and secure had been breached months earlier. The intrusions weren't random or clumsy, they bore the hallmarks of advanced, persistent threats, highly sophisticated cyber tools designed to stay hidden while transmitting real-time data to outside actors. These weren't just surveillance operations, they were pipelines feeding live intelligence, possibly used to guide Israeli strikes with pinpoint accuracy. Although no official findings were released, internal reports suggested that some of the targeting data used by Israel may have come from inside Iran's own systems. That revelation raised a disturbing possibility. Someone had been watching them from within. This is where suspicions about Russia began to deepen. YouTube just dropped a mind-boggling announcement. It is paying creators $64 million per day. Why? Well, because YouTube doesn't have enough creators. That is why you see videos on your homepage that have less than 1,000 views, like this one. Now, of course, that doesn't mean everyone should start a channel, but if you've ever wondered about starting a YouTube channel or a faceless channel, now's kind of the perfect time. YouTube is paying creators millions every day, and it's pushing newer, smaller channels now more than ever. But I'm sure you have many questions on how to get started and grow a channel. We get questions in our email all the time from some of you guys. And that's why we've decided to put all of our YouTube advice into one YouTube video for completely free. So, if you are someone who's interested in starting your own YouTube channel, You can watch that video here on YouTube by clicking on the link in the description or the card on your screen. Moscow has long been a supplier of Iran's military software architecture, including radar integration platforms and satellite coordination systems. If those systems contained hidden back doors or even poorly secured data channels, it wouldn't take much for sensitive information to leak. Whether this was the result of deliberate sabotage or careless engineering remains unclear. But for Iranian cyber analysts, the implications were stark. Their most critical defense systems were built on foreign technology, and that technology may have betrayed them. The incident exposed more than just technical vulnerabilities. It revealed a strategic weakness Iran can no longer ignore. In response, Tehran began reassessing its digital infrastructure, questioning its reliance on foreign code, and pushing for greater cybersecurity independence. The war may have lasted only days, but its digital aftershocks are reshaping Iran's defense doctrine in ways that will echo for years. Now, despite all that mounting concern, Iran's foreign ministry wasted no time pushing back on Sadir's outburst, putting out a statement that made it clear that his views were just his own thoughts as a retired diplomat, not the official line from Tehran. They stressed that while he's got a long history of foreign policy, what he said doesn't speak for the government or shape how they're handling ties with Moscow. That response came quickly, probably to keep things from spiraling out of control, but it didn't stop the storm online, as social media blew up with debates, memes, and hot takes from everyday people questioning if the alliance was as solid as they'd been told. Even the show where Sadir dropped all this issued a disclaimer afterward, saying his views were his alone and not endorsed by them, which just fueled more chatter about cracks in the system. It showed how one voice could ripple out and force everyone to take a second look at what they'd assumed was a done deal. So the big question now is this. If what Sadir said is to be taken as factual, then what reasons does Moscow have for betraying Iran in such a manner? The truth is that Russia's silence wasn't accidental. It was a calculated move shaped by a complex web of interests, starting with its quietly strategic relationship with Israel. For years, Russia has walked a tightrope in Syria, where it maintains key military installations like the Hemaimim Air Base and the naval facility at Tartus. These bases are vital to Russia's projection of power in the Mediterranean, and keeping them secure means avoiding direct conflict with Israel. That's why Moscow and Tel Aviv have developed a deconfliction mechanism. Basically, this is a behind-the-scenes coordination that allows Israel to strike Iranian assets in Syria without triggering Russian retaliation. It's not friendship, it's realism. Russia tolerates Israeli airstrikes as long as they don't threaten its own personnel or strategic assets. Then there's the reality of Ukraine. Russia's military is stretched thin, bleeding resources and manpower in a grinding war that shows no signs of ending. Opening a second front, especially in the volatile Middle East, would be a strategic disaster. Syria learned that the hard way, as Russia didn't show up for them in their time of need, leading to the toppling of Bashar al-Assad's government. Supplying Iran with advanced weapons or getting pulled into a direct confrontation with Israel risks escalation that Russia simply can't afford. Every missile sent to Tehran is one less for the Donbass. Economics also plays a decisive role. When tensions rise in the Middle East, global oil prices tend to spike, and Russia, under heavy Western sanctions, relies on those price surges. After Israel's June strikes on Iran, crude prices jumped, injecting much-needed revenue into Russia's battered economy. In that sense, instability became profitable. Iran's suffering becomes Russia's windfall. Additionally, while Iran may be a practical partner, Israel is a strategic asset. Bilateral trade between Russia and Israel spans billions, covering everything from agricultural technology to cybersecurity. Moscow is not about to jeopardize that for Tehran's sake. Iran is useful as a supplier of drones, a thorn in the side of the West, a distraction, but it is not indispensable. Russia sees Iran not as a brother-in-arms, but as a pawn in a larger game. That larger game isn't new. For over a decade, Russia's entire approach to the Middle East has been about positioning, not protection. In Syria, it worked with Iran to back Assad, but also coordinated airspace with Israel. It sold weapons to Turkey while undermining Kurdish groups that are US-backed. Russia isn't interested in taking sides. It's interested in staying at the center of the board, offering just enough to each player to keep them in orbit. For Iran, that strategy was tolerable when it brought results, but now it's clear that in Moscow's eyes, Tehran is just another piece of the board, and pawn pieces can be sacrificed. And speaking of pawns, if you dig a bit deeper, you'll find reports from intelligence sources laying out how this so-called alliance has always had layers of suspicion baked in, with both sides running spy operations on each other to keep tabs and protect their own agendas. It's not just talk. There's real rivalry under the surface, clashing over things like influence in the region and who gets the upper hand in deals. Take the money side. Russia poured in about $2.7 billion in investments back in 2023, making it Iran's biggest foreign investor by 2024. And they've pledged another $8 billion for oil and gas projects alone. That cash was meant to lock in their partnership, funding everything from energy fields to infrastructure. But it also shows how Russia sees Iran as a market to dominate, rather than a true equal. When push comes to shove, like in that war, those investments didn't translate to boots-on-the-ground help. They just highlighted the one-sided nature of all of this, where Moscow weighs its gains against the risks and often comes out protecting its own wallet first. But what's interesting is that this tension and this fracture, they aren't secretive. It hasn't gone unnoticed by Iran's regional rivals either. Countries like Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and even Turkey are watching closely, taking stock of how exposed Iran looked in the wake of strikes and how alone it ended up being. For years, Iran positioned itself as the defiant power, the one nation in the region that could stare down Israel and outmaneuver US allies through asymmetric strength. But that image took a hit in June. And now, with Russia showing its unreliability, Iran's aura of untouchability is starting to crack. Regional intelligence services are reportedly recalibrating their assessments of Iran's defensive posture. But it's not just Iran's rivals who are rethinking their next moves. The country's own network of allied militias, like Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, and the PMF factions in Iraq, have also started asking hard questions. These groups depend on Tehran for funding, training, and direction, but they also expect leadership and strength from the top. Iran's weakened image after June's war has made some of these groups more cautious, even restless. Quiet reports have emerged of commanders seeking parallel funding, considering attacks, or limiting their exposure to avoid drawing retaliation that Tehran can no longer shield them from. It's not a full unraveling, but there is hesitation. And in a region built on deterrence, hesitation can shift the balance pretty fast. There's also chatter in Gulf security circles about this being a window, a period where Iran is weakened, distracted, and more vulnerable to pressure. And while Saudi Arabia has recently tried to dial down tensions with Tehran through diplomacy, it's unlikely that those moves will continue with the same urgency if Riyadh sees Iran as less of a threat. Strangely, Russia's betrayal might have opened the door to a reshaping of Middle Eastern rivalries, with Iran standing in a weaker position than it has in years. Putin was smart about how he worded this agreement, something that Iran realized a little too late. One key detail in the Russia-Iran strategic pact is that it deliberately avoids hard defense guarantees. The agreement lays out a broad cooperation in military drills, intelligence sharing, and nuclear development, but it stopped short of promising automatic military support if either side comes under attack. And that structure wasn't accidental. From the start, the pact was more about aligning long-term goals than forging a battle alliance. It gave Moscow room to maneuver, able to support Iran diplomatically or economically without being bound to intervene. And now, with tensions rising, Tehran is left staring at the fine print. The safety net they might have assumed was there turns out to be more symbolic than real. That realization stings. Not because the rug was pulled out from under them, but because it was never laid down in the first place. For Iran, the aftermath of the war wasn't just a setback, it felt like a betrayal. Their air defense networks, once seen as strong, was torn apart in days, exposing gaping holes that could take years and billions to fix. Tehran rushed to fill the gaps with homegrown systems, even debuting a new platform they claimed could rival Russia's. But early results showed it couldn't hold up. Public drills and missile parades tried to project strength, but behind the show, Iran's defenses were visibly weaker, and its economy, strained by inflation and sanctions, couldn't keep up with the cost of recovery. The partnership with Russia was meant to ease that pressure. Trade was growing, deals were signed, and Iran even started building drones off Russian blueprints. But when it mattered the most, none of it translated into protection. No jets, no defense systems, just silence. Whatever tactical gains they made were undercut by the simple truth. When Iran needed its ally the most, it stood alone. So, what now? One option is rupture. Iran could pivot towards China, freeze part of its deals with Russia, and scale back military cooperation like drone shipments. But more than likely, the relationship just turns colder. Trade will continue, deals may still be signed, but the illusion of trust, it's gone. Strategic unity has given way to pure transaction. As for China, that idea comes with its own illusions. Beijing has signed trade deals with Iran, yes, but always on cautious, limited terms. It's built a relationship based on economic leverage, not strategic loyalty. And when the June war broke out, China didn't offer support or even strong condemnation. It stuck to its usual neutrality. carefully avoiding anything that wouldn't jeopardize its relationship with the Gulf states or Israel. That silence wasn't oversight, it was strategy. Beijing treats Iran like a resource, not a partner, and Iranian officials are starting to see that. The idea of an Eastern bloc providing security has crumbled just as much as the dream of a Russian backup. Figures like Sadir warn that Beijing, like Moscow, acts in its own interest and won't stand by Iran in a crisis. Trading one unreliable partner for another won't fix the core problem. This led to calls for greater self-reliance, not just in weapons, but in strategy. Sadir's word, scam, captures the national mood. What was sold as an alliance now looks like opportunism. Russia helped when convenient and vanished when it mattered. Trust, once broken, rarely returns. This isn't a temporary strain, it's a fracture, and it shifts everything. Historically, Iran and Russia were never friends. Not during the Cold War, not in Syria, not now. They were partners out of necessity, bound by sanctions and shared enemies, not by belief in each other. Iran brought geography and irregular warfare. Russia brought hardware and global weight. It was functional, not emotional. Every deal had a caveat. Every handshake came with doubt. They relied on each other because they had no better options. Drones for Moscow, missile systems for Tehran. But leverage has its limits, and the June War exposed them. This wasn't a sudden betrayal, it was a slow unraveling of a fragile arrangement. Years of suspicion, masked by necessity, are now boiling over. Iranian officials are quiet. Planners are rethinking strategy. The public is skeptical. And Russia? It's not apologizing, it's adjusting. Iran now faces a brutal choice. Keep playing a rigged game or reset entirely, pivoting east or inward. The alliance isn't over, but the illusion is. What comes next